Hey everybody, Tony D and Little Joan here with a hot take on the would-be kidnappers of Governor Whitmer. I said the other day when I talked about it that I saw the anarchist flag in the background, and that immediately set off a bell in my head. Like, if these guys were militia types, they typically don't have anarchy flags flying in the background. If they're right-wing militias, as everybody in the media keeps calling them, typically they're going to have Confederate flags, uh, sometimes Gadsden flags, things like that. They're not going to have an anarchy flag. Anarchists are, I mean, if you had a pure anarchist, you never do, but they tend to be left because Antifa calls themselves the anarchist all the time. Um, they also call themselves communist, and then there are anarcho-capitalist on the right, ish. But like, and Tim Pool just did an interesting piece today that there is no left and right. And I've been saying that those labels really don't apply, but like they're shorthand for people. They're just words. Like if you had to craft, they have this Overton window, right? And it's like left and right, and authoritarian and libertarian. That's kind of the square. And it's not good enough. It really needs to be a globe where, a 3D globe where like there's a center and it all like, the points come out from the center, and there's all kinds of crazy political ideologies that they mix with religion, and they mix all kinds of things. And the problem is, of course, the media tends to simplify things so you can understand it. And that was fine if the people doing that simplification were doing it in the spirit of informing you. But that's gone. See, the major media outlets don't have that spirit anymore. They're not shortening it to right wing or left wing because they're trying to, get to the meat of the story. They're doing that in order to smear somebody. Now, I don't support these guys in any way, but I don't think they were right wing per se. It seems to be that they were a mixture of political ideologies. So to immediately point them and say, well, they're right wing, that's the media saying, aha, Donald Trump caused this. That's their shorthand for, and then, because people have already made that leap. Well, if Donald Trump hadn't been spewing all this hate, these people would have went to work the next day and lived totally happy and fruitful lives, which simply isn't true. When you get drilled down into the details of this, you can see one guy, he was falling apart financially. That tends to be a hallmark of extremism. You have no hope, right? The members of ISIS, that was a typical thing. I mean, they were in Middle Eastern countries where you couldn't get ahead. They weren't politically connected. Nobody cared about them. They're like a half a step from starving on the street. So what do? They join up with these groups because, well, at least I won't starve. At least I can make a mark in the world. Something. I could do something. And so Whitmer really is more the cause for this than anything, because she drove her own state into the ground in order to gain political points. And I mean, just look at her. Just look at that face. You want to talk about a mean-looking woman? That's a mean-looking woman to me. Yeah. Joan can't stop barking at her. Here, come over here. She's gonna be a pest. Can't let me go through one damn video. You happy? Okay. So, here's Fox. Details of kidnapping plot against Michigan governor emerge. And, she's busy blaming it on Trump because she assumes, because the media said, they're right-wing extremists. Now, that doesn't mean they don't hold some right-wing views. They certainly seem to. And militias tend to be right-wing because militias kind of in that area, because you can see Antifa doesn't call it, they usually don't use the term militia. They've got Rose City Antifa, they got Redneck Revolt, and they got cooler, hipster names. Whereas, these guys are trying to be more like the army, right? They're trying to be more legal in a sense because they're calling themselves militias. We're the citizen militia, stuff like that. That's not what they called themselves. They called themselves Wolverine Watchmen, which I don't know. It's kind of a crazy name. The Detroit Free Press has a story about it. But here's the Marine Times. 2 of the men arrested in the plot were Marines. So this is typical in the militia sort of movement. There's a lot of veterans, guys with training. Like these 2 guys have training. Now, you can't, again, anyone using a phone. And in this article, they talk about how at one meeting they collected the phones, but you guys were probably too far gone and had left a massive trail before you started collecting phones. You can't start collecting phones on the day you start talking about an event like this. You'd had to have started collecting the phones 2 weeks prior, because all the dialogue and posts leading up to the moment where you say, hey, let's do this, all that stuff is going to be evidence used against you. And these guys tried to encrypt their stuff, but it didn't work. I told you, Antifa, they're coming. No amount of encryption is going to save you. Now, if you look at NPR, very left-leaning, Michigan AG says white supremacist groups behind plot to kidnap Governor Whitmer. Look at my face. But here's the Detroit Free Press. These guys were apparently connected to the Boogaloo movement. The movement is comprised of 2 factions. One faction is neo-Nazis and white supremacists who want to start a racial civil war. Another faction has shown up to Black Lives Matter protest wielding anti-police signs. So if this guy had an anarchy flag proudly displayed, and at least one other source, Tim Pool, said some of these guys had been to BLM movements or BLM events, then it's likely these guys are more left-leaning in their ideology. They're anti-government. They're not Antifa, but they are left-leaning. They would be more likely to vote for Biden if they had to choose between Biden and Trump. Not that that makes a difference to Biden and Trump, or it should. They shouldn't be responsible for these people who do crazy, horrible things. But that's not the way the media is going to portray it. They're going to portray it, these are right-wing militias, they're racist, therefore, they're Donald Trump's fault. Why doesn't he stop them? Well, technically, they've been stopped. So there's nothing really to complain about here, except that now, since these guys came out of the woodwork, it's going to be used as a club against Trump in the media. So, and you could see, NPR is definitely going to go down that path. And look, these guys are dangerous regardless of their ideologies. Once you cross the Rubicon and decide, oh, maybe we should kidnap the governor, really you need to be looked at and probably put into a psych ward or in jail if you've made any serious steps towards committing your crimes. The problem is, of course, they're only putting these guys in jail, and there's still thousands and thousands of Antifa guys running around burning things, terrorizing people. We just had those guys terrorize people in Wisconsin, going into residential neighborhoods, throwing bricks through windows. And in one residential home, there was a 70-year-old woman. She was, she had nothing to do with anything, and they just threw bricks through her window, and she was terrified. Terrified, right, doggy? Right, doggy? So, you have to treat people equal under the law. That's the whole point. That's what makes it fair. And they're not. They're making a distinction. Well, you know, these guys are dangerous and should be arrested, whereas those wacky kids who light fires and, throw bricks through people's windows, well, they're mostly peaceful protesters. No, they're not. You have laws on the books. They broke the laws too. Now, they broke different laws. Maybe they weren't as bad, but they've been doing it for over 130 days. It's time to throw them in jail. They broke the law. If you break the law, you should be arrested. And you should probably go to jail if you keep breaking it. So, this idea that, well, as Democrats, we have to protect Antifa and their allies and the BLM movement, that has got to stop. And that's one of the reasons that no Democrat should be reelected in this election. That's one message that has to be sent strongly to them. You cannot distinguish between the kinds of protesters based on their ideologies. You distinguish them based on their actions. If they're peaceful, they get to march. If they're not peaceful and they're destructive and break the law, then they don't get to march. You're protected to peacefully assemble. And, these guys did not peacefully assemble. They plotted to do a lot of stuff, including, throw explosives at cops and blow up bridges and cause all sorts of mayhem. And it doesn't take a lot of people to cause that much mayhem when you have the right equipment and you kind of know what you're doing. So that's the scary thing. This was a good arrest. There's no defense of these guys because they wanted to use so much violence to disrupt people's lives. And they wouldn't have achieved anything other than making Whitmer look sympathetic. And they managed to do that even by getting caught. Now Whitmer looks like a sensible person who, I guess I gotta be more authoritative now. So you've given her free reign to crack down on everybody. Thanks for that, a-holes. I hope you enjoy your stint in prison. It says here that we now live in a world, this is the Detroit Press, quoting Levin. Who's Levin? Quoting one of the guys who was involved in the prosecution, I guess. We now live in a world where we have this broad range of ideologies across the spectrum. There is no one far right. And that's true. So this idea that every time you see in the paper, oh no, far right extremists, run! Like everybody immediately lumped the Proud Boys in with these guys too. The Proud Boys aren't white. They're not racist. They're not. They're a lot of things, but they're not racist. They're not Boogaloo Boys. Now, you could point to individual members who maybe did some things or said some things, but as a movement, as a group, they are just right-wing and maybe sexist, you could say. But the media is quick to lump them all in to racist because the media is left, because they want everybody on the other side of their political spectrum smeared. And it was that way when it was the reverse. Everybody was a hippie to the people who ran the show back in the day. So, what's going to happen? I don't know. Me and little Joan will just keep watching the world turning, I guess.